Hi, and welcome to another day where I break down basketball games, teams, and players in the Zenith Bank MBBF Women's Basketball Final 8 taking place in Lagos. So the first game quickly was between Bayelsa Blue Whales and Royal Aces. Now, that game was just a back and forth game between both teams. At some point, Bayelsa were leading, and then the Royal Aces would take the lead, and then to go back to Bayelsa. In fact, during the final minutes of the game was dictated by the Royal Aces because, they understood, I guess, at that point. And then with the experience of the players on the team, they were able to win that game against Bayelsa. Bayelsa were shooting at 18.8 field goal percentage, which is really low, and 65% on the free throw with 60 rebounds in that game and just 6 assists. While the Aces had 26.6% field goal percentage and 50% on the free throw, and they had 56 rebounds, just 4 rebounds lower than Bayelsa's rebound, and then 9 assists. So that's the game, and we know that the Royal Aces have qualified for the semifinals. Let's talk about the players that stood out for the Royal Aces. Ogedengbe had 14 points and a total of 20 rebounds. Incredible. Like she was in their previous game, she was everywhere in this game against Bayelsa, doing everything she can or could with her experience, and that was how they got that win against Bayelsa. Every other player on the team chipped in a little bit here and there. Mary Gwokolo had 6 points, and then there was 5 points from Uyindamola, and then 4 points from Enel Male. So it was just a mix of players coming in and doing a little bit of what they could to help their team. But basically, Ogedengbe Bidemi did most of the job, and kudos to her. Her team won, and now they've qualified for the semifinals. The second game was between Dolphins and the Nigerian Customs. The Nigerian Customs team, were doing their best to stay in that game. They were trying their best to score twos, drive hard, and then most of the times when they were able to drive in hard, they got the layup or they got the foul call, and then they went to the free throw line to shoot. But when a team is scoring threes and you're only scoring or barely scoring twos, there's no way you can stand a chance in that game. So that's how Dolphins were able to dominate in that game. Defensively, they were playing one-on-one, and you know how quick the Dolphins players are. So it wasn't really a brilliant idea for them. Maybe they would have gone zone defense on them just to see how that would work against the Dolphins' quick players, but they decided to rely on a one-on-one. They were allowing Dolphins to gamble too many 3 points, especially in the beginning of the game. And Dolphins to come in, scoring-wise, a bit slow from the first quarter and then a little bit in the second quarter. But when you allow them to keep shooting and getting comfortable, before you know it, those shots that they were missing begin to, drop. And that was what happened against the Nigerian Customs. Dolphins, like I said, were trying to warm up in the game, so they were just taking shots and missing, and they were looking, at some points when their 3 points weren't coming from the outside, they were now looking inside to dropping the ball to the open players after the drive, the kick, they were beginning to do all of that. And there's that dynamic, there's that understanding between the Dolphins players. So that comes really easy for them. The Dolphins team, as we already know by this time, are a team that loves to shoot. And from how they keep playing every game, you can tell that they are a team that are encouraged to shoot by their coaches. So it's not a situation where they would shoot and then they'll be worried that their coach will take them out of the game, like maybe a team like Bayelsa, for instance. No, their coaches allow them to shoot, to miss as many times as possible, because it's only a shot that you take that, you can determine whether you score or you don't score. Defensively, they also played one-on-one, but then they eased off a little bit, I noticed, in this game against the Nigerian Customs on the defensive pressure. Compared to how they normally play, they come in fired up from the beginning to the end. But this game, they decided to ease off a little bit. I mean, they've already won 2 games, so they probably didn't want to put in too much energy, because they knew that they were going to play the semifinals against a team that might come stronger than they expected. So they eased off a little bit on the defense. They were channeling the Customs team to the side, to the baseline, and forcing them to take some bad shots, or even forcing them to take layups that weren't sinking for the Nigerian Customs at that point. And Dolphins in this game against the Nigerian Customs were shooting at 61.1% field goal percentage, and they have a 35.7% 3-point percentage with a 45.5% on the free throw. They had 48 rebounds in this game, and guess how many assists? 21 assists in this game. That's to show you how much they were sharing the ball, how much they were playing together, and the synergy was really strong. In fact, I see Dolphins as one of the teams that are really, really ready for this final eight. They're looking for that 7.5 million. It's not a small money. And of course, they also want to play in the finals. It's been a while that we've seen Dolphins in the finals. We used to see Dolphins in the finals back then when we used to have Amaka and Mary and Emma Bong, those kind of people. Then, not now, it's been a long time, but they've been, fighting and trying to get themselves back into that position. And so far, they've been doing great. And now we'll talk about the third game for the day, MFM against Titans. Now, MFM, came in shooting as usual. They kind of played similarly like the Dolphins team. They came in shooting. Wando was, looking for her shots, finding every possible way to get her, in rhythm in that game. One thing about Wando is when she's not scoring, she's looking to create opportunities for her teammates. So she's giving those drop passes, driving in, kicking out to the open shooter or looking in for the post players. Wando is a really smart player and a player who knows how to feed the post. Not a lot of guards in the Nigerian league know how to feed the post. That's not something that we have in this era of basketball that I've noticed. In the era of Nkechi Akashili, Magdalene, or Upe Atosu, we used to see post players, getting fed the ball and doing their post moves and just giving us, intense basketball. You see post moves, you see, guards playing together with their posts was really interesting in that era compared to now when, it's just mostly guards shooting and shining at the top. But Wando is a player that brings in that little mix once in a while. Another player that came in strong in this game against Titans was Abigail. She has been nowhere to be found so far in their first few games or 2 games. But today she came in strong. She was getting the ball inside the paint. She was getting rebounds, creating for herself. Everything was working for Abigail. She was getting rebounds. She had 20 points in that game against Titans. In fact, Abigail's stats shows that 10 rebounds and 20 points. That's an incredible game for her. Another player that stood out was Hemba Mwando with 19 points. In fact, Wando had 6 3-pointers in that game. She was just everywhere, especially in the first half of the game. Defensively, we know how MFM play. They come in protecting the rim, grabbing rebounds, stopping their opponents from getting anywhere close to, any offensive rebounds. So that was a good thing for them that they maintained. Their stats, they have 38.2 field goal percentage, 22.6 3-point percentage. That is high, but not as high as that of the Dolphins team. And they have 51 rebound in that game against Titans. They had a whooping 17 assists dished out in that game, and they of course had a 66.7 free throw percentage. It was an incredible game for the MFM team. They really, understand. I mean, they're the champions back to back, so who knows? They want to get a repeat their excellence, repeat their hard work, and just continue to prove to everyone in the Nigerian basketball space that they are here to stay. Quickly about the Titans team, one thing I noticed in that game about the Titans and in the games that they've played so far is their free throws. They are really poor free throw shooters, and you don't want to have that, because if you have a situation where a team, is playing neck to neck with you and then one of your teammates is fouled, you should trust your teammate enough to score, because that free throw might help your team. So they got on the free throw line, they got fouled, but they were not scoring. Just like their previous game, they were missing a lot of free throws, and I think that's something they really need to work on. They also need to work on ball control and pressure. When a team puts pressure on them on defense, they just tend to turn the ball over back to back to back. So that's something they need to work on. Training with the clock, having game situation practices, just doing everything to be in a game situation mood. That's what the Titans team need to focus on. They do a good job defensively, protecting their rim, switching on defense and all of that. They have a pretty good size and, pretty good players who can, improve, who can learn and all of that. So hopefully they get to fix that and come in stronger probably the next season, because of course they didn't qualify for the semifinals. Like we know, MFM already qualified for the semifinals game, and they will be playing First Bank, which takes me to the next game between First Bank and Air Warriors. So now about the Air Warriors team, we know that Air Warriors were not able to make it last season due to an accident that they had coming to Lagos for the final 8. So it's great to see them this season coming in. And they also had a player who was in the 2019 championship team, and that's Kacham. She came in with that experience, but it was not enough for them this season, unfortunately. That game against First Bank, they were trying their best, shooting early, trying to get warmed up into the game. But of course, we know the kind of defense that First Bank plays. It's not a defense that a lot of teams have, figured out how to navigate around. They had a few good ball rotation. They were moving the ball effectively, but the execution was the problem. There was no proper execution to the point that it led to, points. They did a good job finding each other on the floor, dishing out those passes once in a while and getting some good looks, making some baskets that helps them, at some points in the game. And then something else that works for them, making good decisions on when to shoot or when to lay up and stuff like that. So that was good for them. Defensively, they were putting their bodies on First Bank, bumping into them and trying to slow them down, especially their post players, because of course, First Bank has some pretty good post players that are experienced, that are smart. I'm talking Marilyn, Marvelous, and even the other two post players that are pretty good, although they are still young. Defensively, they were giving First Bank a tough time getting to the basket. They were hustling for the rebounds as well, and they were just pushing and trying their best to stay in that game. First Bank, on the other hand, are one of the teams that we know to have an organized offensive play. They always have a play. They always, make sure that they run their play complete before the basket is attempted. And that's why you have multiple passes, multiple looks inside the paint, or drive and kick out to a guard, and all of that movement. And First Bank, they always have a lot of dribble penetration and then kick out to the open player. All those kind of things is something that First Bank are known for. They handle their offense pretty well, attacking at the right time, taking a jumper at the right time, players going in, driving in hard for the layups. They crash in for the offensive rebounds, put back. They do a lot of things to get that second chance opportunity when they don't score. So most of the time they use the 24 shot clock to almost its completion, but then they are able to still get the rebound if they miss and give themselves another 14 seconds to still attack. That's something that not all the teams get to do. And that's why First Bank is a team that is difficult to stop offensively or even defensively. For First Bank, overall, they have a great shot selection. They know when, a player is hot and they look for that player. They know when, okay, this is a good shot, but I can give a better shot for, us to get this point. And there's something that Coach Julie did towards the end of that game that I noticed. She took out the first 5, or should I say the first 6 players, let them, rest on the bench for a while. And then she put in the players that haven't been getting a lot of playing time. So that way, her players are resting because they have a tough game in the semifinals against MFM. And the other players are also coming in and getting a feel of the game to prepare for the semifinal. So that was a good decision by Coach Julie. But eventually, towards the end of the game, she brought in the first 5. And of course, they rounded up the game. So percentage-wise, First Bank are shooting at 45.5% field goal percentage, which is really high. I think higher than both Dolphins and MFM and even the Royal Aces. They are shooting 3 points, 25% on the 3 points, and then 90% on the free throw. In that game against Air Warriors, they had 54 rebounds. This shows again how strong and how good they are with their defensive rebounds, and even the offensive rebounds, they will go in there. And then they had 20 assists in that game. Once again, shows how much they share the ball amongst each other. Just like the Dolphins team, they share the ball and they have multiple people on the stats scoring points in the game. Let's look at the stats for the players that had the most points. We have Ogoigbe Marilyn with 16 points in that game. She was just a menace. She had 7 rebounds, 13 points for Naibe Jessica. That was great. She's also one of the most experienced guards that the First Bank team has, and of course, one of the most experienced guards in Nigeria. Another player that had 8 points is Ngbo Chiamaka, who is also one of the post players on the team. Overall, that game was a good game for the First Bank team in preparation for the semifinals. So that's it for all the games in the group stage. Now we are into the semifinals game, and we know that the first game is going to be between the Royal Aces and Dolphins, and then the second game will be between MFM and First Bank, and that's the game that I call the finals before the finals, if you know what I mean. Thank you all so much for always being here, liking, sharing, and commenting. I see you all. Please don't forget to like, to share, and also to comment. We'll be seeing the semifinals game today. So until then, Teresa out.